Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Coast to Coast Combat Hour. I'm your host, Matthew Hawkins, along with my guest host, Ed Carbajal. And on a weekly basis, we plan to bring you the biggest news and interviews in the world of combat sports. Ed, how you doing, my man?
Good, just dealing with these allergies here in Jersey.
Yeah, you and your East Coast BS out there. You got to come to SoCal. This is it's 85 and clear out. But on the MMA side, we're lucky to have with us tonight Bellator's lead cutman, Matt Marsden, known as Cutman Matt on the MMAcommunity.com. A friend of the show, and we're glad to have you. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks. I mean, I don't know how lucky you are, but I'll take it.
No, it's great. We have a lot of questions for you, and anybody who watched last week's show saw me in the sweater of absolute glorious victory. Um, and I noticed on Twitter and some of the other social media that you actually got to work Fedor's corner to get started off. What was that like?
It was funny. I talked to my wife a little bit afterward because she asked the same question, and I said he really did, first time ever, intimidate me while I've had fighters that were trying to get in the moment when I'm greasing them up, and they're just trying to get there, and I'm the only person in front of them, so they might stare me down or something like that. But yeah, usually just whatever. But Fedor looked me right in the eye. I don't know why, but like I got goosebumps. And like they weren't like, oh, I'm about to see something awesome goosebumps. It was like absolute fear, like I'm in the purge goosebumps. So
Yeah,
but like first time that's ever happened.
yeah,
But no, it was cool because his corner was so excited when he won, and it was nice to me, I guess, to see that even after so many fights and so many years and all these people around him, that when he wins and he wins big, there's still that level of like true excitement, that they all had. It was just as exciting, I think, as the first time he probably ever won for them.
that's it's funny you mentioned that because when they did that first press conference in New York to announce that they were coming to have the event in New York with all the fighters there, I think it was still kind of cold out at the Garden when they did that at the in Chase Square, inside of Madison Square Garden. I remember I was front row taking photos, and I was sitting in front of Fedor where I was sitting, and I was taking photos, and he just looked directly at me and locked eyes, and I was like, I felt like I shouldn't be taking photos, so
Right? It's
yeah,
intimidating when he
yeah.
locks eyes with you.
I actually have
You
a
know.
photo of the stare. I got to find a way to post it, but share it with you
Uh,
guys. But yeah, it's a creepy look. I mean, and it's nothing. It's just him. It's just him with no expression. I actually got in trouble for walking around with no expression a couple of weeks ago. So I guess people are looking for smiles or something, not just I don't know. I don't want to say he's dead inside, but it's
that's what
just
it looks like.
yeah.
I mean, there's no better description. It was just I looked him dead in the eye, and there was just it wasn't that I felt anything. It was that I didn't feel anything. I didn't get any sense of anything off of him, and that was just weird. So,
Does he talk to you at all, or is he just completely silent throughout it?
no, he doesn't really talk. Just what little bit he has
Yeah.
to. I mean, he's friendly enough, when he needs to be. But Jerry Millen, his manager, he, you know, speaks for Fedor most of the time, as far as I'm concerned. I don't go directly to him. I go to Jerry for most things.
So let me ask you. I mean, just because of the business you're in, a lot. I mean, I'm sure you get this question a lot, but like, how long have you been doing it, and how does one get started in the business of being a cut man?
I've been doing it since 2006, and I got my start because I was training, and I was also I had been a combat medic in the army, and then I moved on to nursing as a civilian, and I was training at St. Charles MMA and BJJ, and they were putting on a charity show called GIs versus Joes. And what it was all amateur bouts. Half of the fighters, or all the opponents on one side, blue corner, let's say, were local amateur fighters, and all the fighters in the red corner were Army combatives guys up from Fort Leonard Wood. So it was a nice, like, military oriented charity show. And my coach said, "Have you ever been a cut man before? I need a cut man, but I don't have any money." And I said, I've never done it, but I think I can figure it out. And then it was just me saying, hey, I'll figure it out. But anytime anybody asks me how to get started, the most important thing, and I'm seeing less and less of this, is that you actually be connected to a gym in some way. I'm not even saying necessarily that you have to train, because you can be maybe somebody older that's into the sport or whatever, but you need to be in the gym. You need to be wrapping guys up before training. You need to be working their sparring sessions.
Hmm.
That's where the practice comes into play. It took me a solid 3-4 years to get good at wrapping hands. And a lot of people watch a few videos on YouTube and wrap their buddy up in their living room, and then they'll hit me up for a job. So I don't, what gym are you connected to? What coach can I talk to that's had some of your hand wraps on some of their fighters or they themselves and can vouch for you? People think that the cage side work is the most important thing, but hand wraps, like that's what I judge other cutmen by, are their hand wraps, not what they can do cage side.
Are the cutmen are they hired by the promotion? Are you an employee of Bellator, or does the commission have a say in who the cutman is? I never was clear on exactly how that worked.
We're contractors contracted by the promotion. Now we are all licensed, and this actually came up not with us, luckily, with the other guys, UFC, but they had a cutman that got into it with a commissioner, and then they realized that the UFC had forgotten to license all of their cutmen, and
Hmm.
so therefore the commissioner had no recourse to deal with that cutman. But uh, the way it should be, all cutmen are licensed by the commission as a second, so just like any coach would be for a fighter. And then that way, if the cutman on behalf of the promotion does do something shady or wrong or just get in the face of the commissioner, they can be reprimanded in any way that a coach could.
Can a fighter request you, or is it completely set up by the promotion generally?
A fighter can request hand wraps. That's perfectly fine, and I have no problem with that because it's very much just a feel, and it's a very important part of the fight. But one thing that I don't uh, honor, I guess I would say, is a request for the corner, mainly because uh, you do have cutmen in the industry, none that I've hired, but there are cutmen in the industry that will kind of cutthroat each other and backstab each other a little bit and say, hey, make sure you request me so I get TV time for my sponsors or something like that. But then
Wow.
on the other hand, we always go back to Phil Nurse and GSP and the greasing incident. And, if there's a fighter that's requesting a specific cutman for a corner, I mean, I don't know that money didn't exchange hands. I don't know if they're old buddies from the block or if they trained together for 10 years before. So just because I've hired X Cutman for the promotion doesn't mean that he might not still feel inclined to help his buddy out in a Phil Nurse type way. So I always, in the case of the corner where there could be greasing or something like that going on, if there's a request for a specific cutman, I'm actually more likely to deny that than to allow that.
Well, that makes sense. It keeps any kind of conflict of interest, like you said, out of the
Yeah.
mix. Um, you get back to we're going to kind of jump back to what you're talking about when you were talking about Fedor there for a minute, and you talked about the sense of relief. Do you have a chance to be around Scott Coker at all? I know that since Coker signed Fedor, that was his first win since the Brett Rogers fight in Strikeforce in November of 2009. So he had actually, I think it was 5 or 6 fights in a row now that it didn't end well, and obviously he's putting money into Fedor. Do you get a sense from him that it's obviously I don't think he goes into the fight necessarily rooting for somebody, at least not outwardly. But did you get any kind of sense of relief from him that kind of his investment may have actually kind of
Uh,
paid off?
if if I were to say that I got relief from Scott, and I don't, we see each other sometimes, we have dinner every once in a while, but we're not texting each other daily. I'm not trying to give that idea, but I would say that he had relief that it was a good fight, that it was a fight that people were talking about. He's just a fan. I mean, you have to remember, like, all of Scott's business decisions, I think, come from him being a fan first
Yeah.
and what he thinks that he would want to see. If he were sitting at home on his couch, what would he want to see? And while, in his heart, he may be a big fan of Fedor, what he's a fan of even more than that is just really good fights. And I think that that's what we got. I mean, everybody was talking about it. It was a great kind of comeback because, he got caught early. And then when he landed that hip toss on Mir, it was like the whole crowd just exploded because it was, wow, it was this classic Fedor move. And I think that's what really made Scott happy was we got like a classic level fight, almost like a pride fight, really, with the way that they just came out like barn blazing, at each
Yeah.
other. It reminded me of back in the day.
I know I had a friend, my friend Yuri, you've actually met before. He was at the event out there in Chicago, and he talked about how electric the crowd was. In your travels for Bellator, obviously you've done some smaller Indian reservation shows in Oklahoma, and I think you even had one maybe in Boise one time, but or in Idaho. But what cities do you think really? Have you noticed a difference in any cities from the bigger cities that you've gone to, where the crowd really is into it, or maybe a more knowledgeable fan base, or anything like that?
I'm always surprised at the insanity that is in the arena at the Tel Aviv show. We've gone there twice now. It sells out like ahead of time. The crowd is insane at the Tel Aviv shows, and you wouldn't think of Tel Aviv as being that big of a fight town like MMA. You don't think of, I mean, what we don't have a ton of fighters from Israel or even representing Israel. We have several now thanks to Bellator, but before that,
Mhm.
how many were there? So it's just surprising to me how into it the Israelis are into MMA. But as far as domestically, Chicago always pops. I find that when we have down cities, it's cities that have a lot of other stuff to do. They're kind of like, we need to impress them and we need to bring something bigger to the table. We can't just bring the standard show and impress an LA crowd, for instance.
Hmm.
So, Chicago though, they appreciate a good fight up in Chicago, and I'll go ahead and say because of the Illinois Athletic Commission being as awful as they are, Chicago doesn't get a lot of MMA the way that they should. There should be a lot of big shows. It should be us and the UFC and EFL and ACB, all those people going there regularly. The commission is just such a horrible thing to deal with there that nobody wants to go. And so that's why you end up seeing us a lot of times in St. Louis or crossing the line in Indiana if we can.
I'm pretty sure I've seen you at you've done you've worked events at Mohegan Sun too, right?
Yes,
I
crowd
feel like
usually, yeah.
yeah, they have a good crowd. I feel like that crowd is always pretty knowledgeable of the sport and even though sometimes they might get a little rough because it's inside a casino, you expect that.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
but
okay. That's MMA.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, because the last time they were up this way, I worked that event, and I'm pretty sure I've seen you. I feel like I have seen you when I'm in media row walk past me. So I always say, Stitch Duran always says hi. Um, but the last event that's probably the most what's the word I'm looking for? Judgmental they were of the outcomes of the fight. That was the one with Matt Mitrione and Roy
Oh,
Nelson.
yeah.
Yeah, and then
I
Heather Hardy
actually
on
kind of
that too.
disagreed with that myself, but
Hmm.
I would have loved to have seen a fourth round on that one. That was what I
Yeah,
was hoping for. Uh, but I don't mind it. Sorry if I just screamed into the mic there. I
it's
don't
all right.
mind it when the crowd is judgmental of the judges' decisions. Like it doesn't bother me one bit because they have better views than I do. They're seeing it on TV from 17 different angles. They've heard and seen
Yeah,
things that I didn't, and it's the crowd is the same. They have all the screens to work with. You know what I mean? They're not being swayed, I guess, by
yeah.
the coaches in the corner the way that I am. I mean, trust me, that happens. There'll be times I think that somebody's kicking ass, and then when I go back and watch it, I'll be like, man, was I swayed by those coaches?
Yeah,
What this thing.
it's funny because people think that cage side is like the best place to watch it, but you don't have the best angle, like you said. I mean, I shot photo cage side once, and I had to watch that whole event after the fact to get to do a proper pieces on post fight analysis and
Right.
things like that. So yeah, I think Joe Rogan said that once. The best seat is actually in your house.
Yep. And if I can, like, I'll position my seat next to a judge or a timekeeper, somebody that might have a monitor in front of them, so that I can look over and see the monitor too. It's easier for me. Yeah, I've even had my wife text me. Like, I'll text my wife at home, like, "Is he cut? Is it over his right eye? I can't tell, from where
That's
I'm at,
funny.
but I think it is." And she'll be like, "Oh yeah," or no, it's under his right eye. I can see it better on TV. So yeah, definitely at home or in the crowd watching the screens, much better view than around cage side.
So just out of curiosity, how many cut men usually work an event? Obviously, it's not just you. It's usually you and another guy, or you and a few.
It's typically five of us. The average crew is five. It's myself, Dean Lassiter, and Stitch are the primary three. Um, I do all the international shows as well. Stitch and Dean work all of the domestic shows with me, and then I'll typically hire at least 2, if not 3 more, depending on the size of the show.
Mhm.
So it kind of depends on where we're going, and if I know ahead of time how many rap requests we're going to have, and things like that. But that is one benefit of my job, is I get to see the cards a little bit ahead of time, so I can get my staffing up to par.
Do you get paid per the event, or do you get paid for the amount of fights you work in a night? Is it, how does that work?
It's per the event. For all cutmen, it's per the event. But with boxing cutmen, it's per the fighter.
Hmm.
So when I'm working boxing, I'll either negotiate a flat fee with that boxer for that fight, or take a percentage of the purse, which is, it can be anywhere from like 1 to 5%, depending. Whereas with MMA, it's just a flat fee for the entire night, and that includes wrapping and any cage side work.
So it makes no difference. Like this Saturday's Bellator event right now, I'm seeing 19 fights listed.
19, yeah, right. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I don't make any more for 19 than I do for 12.
Interesting.
So, but that kind of evens out sometimes, because every once in a while I'll pull a card over in England where we're only doing like maybe like 5 or 6, in conjunction with a Bama card, and then it works out and I have an easy night. So.
Does Bama has their own cutmen then, because they're considered a separate promotion that night?
They do, but it just so happens that I use a lot of. So I have my domestic crew, which is like Dean and Stitch, but I have the same thing internationally. I have an international crew, and a lot of them also work for Bama. So I just pick them up, like, okay, who's working the Bama show? All right, that's who I'll use as well. So we just kind of share, but I do pay them separately, so they get to double down on the night.
You mentioned also working for ACB. Is that who you did a show in Brazil with recently? I think I saw that you were going down there.
So I was. Funny story about that. I get to the airport, and the guy at the desk that go down to Brazil, he looks through my passport and he flips through it and he gives me this dirty look, right? And he starts over and he flips through the passport. I get that look again. I'm like, what the hell is going on with my passport? I have a lot of international travel, but this is crazy. He flips through it again, but this time he pinches each page as he's going through. And I was like, what are you looking for? Just tell me. You're obviously putting on a show at this point in time. And he goes, where's your visa? And I was like, visa? I'm just going for the weekend. I'll actually be there less than 24 hours. And he goes, yeah, I know, you need a visa. You need to apply for it 5 days ago in Miami. And I was like, really? America needs a. I know that's so American to do, but I was like, America needs a visa just to go to Brazil for the weekend. And he goes, yeah. So I call up my contact in ACB, who's an English guy, and he's like, nobody else needed one. He's like, none of the UK guys, none of the Russia guys, nobody else but you, the one American, needed a visa. So you fell through the cracks because we didn't think anybody needed one. So I was just like, well. Good luck on the show. I guess you're gonna be short one person because I couldn't get to Brazil. I was happy it happened here and not in Brazil, because I've had that happen trying to get into Canada with Bellator under the Bjorn reign, and it turned into a 12-hour fiasco at the Canadian border. So at least I just got sent home from the airport here.
Oh yeah, that's better. Hey, just what's funny? You mentioned how important rapping is. Shouldn't they call you rap men instead of cut men? Then, if rapping, you probably rap. Is that is that
right with that?
rappers? I mean, I don't know. I just feel like that. You mentioned it several times, so I'm like, I mean,
a long time ago. It's funny you kind of mentioned that. A long time ago, I tried to start a hashtag. I don't know, do the kids still do that? Do they still start the hashtags these days?
Yeah.
But, and it was Cut Life. It was just like, yeah, this is me traveling around doing Cutman things. So it was Cut Life. And I looked and I realized that what I had been doing was hashtagging all of my stuff with what it apparently is for barbers and hairstylists. So all of my stuff from fights was showing up in all these Instagram and Twitter feeds of all these barbers and salon hairdressers and everything. And I was like, no wonder I wasn't getting any traction with that. Because they're like, what the hell is this doing in my feed?
Well, what you should do? You should have because you said you have your crew. So if all your crew uses social media, have them use the hashtag rappers, like WRAP rappers, and see if that catches on.
It might. Yeah. I'll see if we can do it this weekend. We get a lot of hand rapping pics and put them out there.
Yeah. Did you rap John Jones when he was in Connecticut? The Twitter John Jones, not Johnny Bones Jones.
Oh yeah,
You rapped
yeah.
him?
We wrapped him up. Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
He was a
cool.
good time, man. He was having just the best time. That was fun to see for him because
Yeah, I'm
he's
actually
like,
trying to get him on this podcast because I talked to him. He's on this side of the country, so um
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. He's a really good guy, and he had big hands. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
lie, like he had much larger hands than I expected. I sat down and I was like, whoa, shit. Okay, like you've like this pad is not big enough. I was not expecting this. So don't go hit anybody with this because it's not going to be as good as it should be. But yeah, he had a good time. He brought a friend of his, and they were taking
Yeah.
pictures and just having a good time meeting everybody. But yeah,
Yeah, he fell into MMA. He's actually a really nice guy too. He handles all that the misdirected hate very well.
oh, very well. I mean, that was how I found him. Was just laughing at him. You know what I mean? Like, or I guess laughing with him at all the people just confusing him for John Jones, and then we just started talking via DM, and then Ryan Grab, our head of PR, came up to me and he goes, do you know John Jones? And I was like, which one? You know, you had to ask which one. And he's like, Twitter John Jones, the video game programmer. And I was like, actually, I do. And he goes, yeah, he said, okay. He's like, do you want to wrap his hands for a thing? And I was like, yeah. I was like, is he drunk? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, well, I definitely do now. It's like, as long as he's been drinking, you know, because it'll be even more fun. But
Well,
I was happy to have him there.
Yeah, he's been, he has the name John Jones. He's been getting special treatment on some of the events lately. I've been to about 200 plus events. I think I got comped once. I'm waiting for a Matt Hawkins to become famous. Once that happens, I'll be happy to go to much more shows. But so getting back to ACB real quick, just because I'm curious about it. What events have you worked? Have you officially done any of their shows then, or was that one
we're trying to get started. I have events booked in the future in Chicago and Las Vegas, and I believe Bermuda. I don't know if that's out yet. I don't know how much trouble. I'm not sure if I'm even supposed to know any of that.
I saw that they were
have
supposed to have a U.S. show in September, I think it was, but it didn't have a location listed. So
then I'm not gonna say. Yeah, whatever. So just those places I mentioned sometime in the future. But yeah, ACB's making a nice push, and I was stoked to see their jiu-jitsu tournament. Actually, I watched that. What was that? What day is it today? Tuesday. So I watched that. Was it Sunday or Monday? They had their jiu-jitsu.
It was like Sunday, yeah.
They ran live on YouTube, and that was really cool to see that they kind of did it like an MMA card, where it wasn't a tourney, but just matches in a row. So
yeah, I went to their.
I went to the. They're doing it again.
Yeah, they put on a show for the fans. There's not a lot of. There's not a lot of extra stuff going on. There's no ring girls, which I'm not a big fan of. But I went to their show that they had they had one in Southern California. Tiago Alves fought, and it was like 20 something fights, just no time in between, and they just kept it going through. And I really enjoyed it. And then I know that they had some issues with some other stuff when they tried to have a show here. But I'm curious. I just the more shows, obviously, the better. And when you watch them, I like, they got Frank Mir does their play-by-play online, and it's pretty much nonstop action. They're definitely one of the more exciting promotions that I get a chance to watch.
Yeah, and like I said, they treat everyone really well as well. I'm not gonna lie. One of the reasons that I was willing to even talk to them was because I had heard from people working for them already that everything was good to go there. Because there are some promotions that kind of leaks through the industry not to go work for. And ACB luckily did not have that. It was the exact opposite. So when the opportunity came up, I was like, well, yeah, absolutely, why not? And I asked Bellator, but they've always been, Scott and like Rich and those guys have always been very much, we're not here to hold you back. Go get sponsors, go work other shows, go do, one of our cutmen is working with Stitch on the new Creed 2 or whatever, Bellator's always been encouraging of all of us to go out and just get that money. Basically, just go out and do what you got to do, get that money.
That's cool. I've talked to I talked to a UFC employee. I'm not going to say who it was, but
cutthroat over there.
They I was talking to him and mentioning, I mentioned, they asked me if I was coming to one of their events, and I explained that I had some tickets for some Bellator shows actually, and the guy just looks at me and goes, "Hey, if Dana wasn't on my ass so much, I'd be there watching it with you guys. You know, he goes, I mean, it's like you say, it's cutthroat them. So it's nice to hear Scott's kind of takes a different angle to it. Like you said, maybe it's, I'm not saying Dana White's not a fan, but Scott Coker is definitely a fan's promoter, at least as much as he
can
can
be
be.
a fan and still have higher priorities. You know what I mean? Like you can be a fan and still prioritize money,
Yeah.
over, being a fan. And I think Scott's just kind of the opposite. And I think he prioritizes being a fan. And he's an old school fan too. If you even look at our merch, it's taken definitely like an old school turn, kind of with like the fight poster type graphic layouts and stuff like that. That's very much like Scott's touch on those kind of things.
No, I tell people that too, and I've I took some fans that were longtime MMA fans to the event in New York. Some people that lived out there locally that I had met through the MMA community, and when they got there, I kind of told them, and I tell people this today. I love going to a UFC event. It's top promotion, great event to go to, but if you want to go have a fun time at an event and have kind of that old school feel, to me, it's the Florida Bellator event. The amount of fighters that are walking around, it reminds me of the old King of the Cage days, or some of the old smaller Indian reservation shows where guys are so accessible, and it just, to me, it's more of a real friendly kind of atmosphere. Maybe it's, you don't have the ushers breathing down your neck necessarily like you do at a UFC event. It's just a little bit more of a loose atmosphere. And
yeah,
that's how I tell
I
everybody.
think that's by design. You can come right up to the bike racks as a fan and get really close to where the fighters are walking in and out. It actually kind of reminds me of a WWE house show.
Okay.
If you've been to one of those, like with how accessible, like on those house shows, the wrestlers are so much more accessible and willing to like take a second because they know they're not on camera and be out of character a little bit. And I've always felt that way about our shows, that they feel like that. Where, the fighters are going to be out there; they're going to be walking around. If you try even the slightest little bit, you'll get to meet probably whoever it was that you wanted to meet at one of our shows.
No, exactly.
Yeah, worst case scenario, you just get in touch with somebody wearing a badge and say, "I'd like to meet so and so," and it's probably going to make it happen. Because the fighters want to meet fans as much as the fans want to meet them. They're just stoked to be there. There's no doubt about that. Even the ones that have been doing this a long time, like Renzo Gracie. Renzo Gracie should be sick of this by now. Sick of it. He's not sick of it at all. He loves it. He loves every
No,
second
he
of
loves
it.
it. Yeah.
And that's what I like to see. And I think that sometimes, we get why'd you make that fight? Because it's fun. There's no other reason to make some of the fights that we make other than they're just fun, and they're just a fight that if you want to be a hardcore fan and you want to be a statistical like jerk about it,
Yeah.
Okay, it doesn't maybe make much sense on paper, but you know what? We're all going to watch it because it's going to be really, really
Yeah.
fun.
It's funny you're saying that because it's you're kind of alluding. We had Angelo Reyes on a couple of weeks back, Frank Mir's striking coach, and he kind of hinted at commented on like that how MMA fans seem to have this weird. It's like it's cool to be mean to the people that are producing content. You're watching anyway. It's a weird culture. That's one thing if I have to say it, if I had a gripe with my own sport, it would be that. But anyway, I didn't mean to allude from what you were saying. What I wanted to ask
you actually. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna ask you because you said you were a combat medic and that's how you got in. I was wondering if is there anything that you've seen that's as like the worst injury in the cage that you've seen comparable to anything from the way you got into it?
I saw worse stuff actually in the ER as a civilian than I have in the cage, but not so much as a combat medic. I never got into that. I was hospital based a lot of the time, and then I moved over from being a combat medic in a hospital based unit there in St. Louis to a psychological operations unit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I spent a lot of my time there training soldiers up that were getting ready for deployment on their combat lifesaver certifications. But as a civilian in the ER in St. Louis, I saw plenty, quite a bit. But I've had some pretty nasty stuff. If you go back to, I want to say it was Bellator 83 in wasn't Vancouver, it's Portland, Oregon, right there by Vancouver. Portland, Oregon, John Alessio took a hard knee from and on his way to a title, Will Brooks. And that injury was bad enough that I have that framed enough in my house. Like there's a picture of that injury up in my house because it was bad enough.
Wow.
But I've seen some interesting stuff in the cage. I'm trying to remember who it was. It was in Atlantic City. Would have been Bellator 60s or 70s, somewhere around in there. We had a fighter who leg kicked the other fighter, who checked it, and he got the weirdest like arterial branch bleeding on his leg. Had no other marks on his leg, but had this really superficial arterial branch that just started splurting like Saw movie out of his leg, but tiny, like a little squirt gun, just just squirting out. And he the fighter, of course, like looks down at his leg, and it looks like a Kill Bill movie all of a sudden, from a check kick, and he starts freaking out. And we're sitting down, and I was like, I know this looks bad, but I'm just gonna put my finger here for a few seconds. I promise it'll go away. It's like spraying you in the face, but it's not as bad as it seems. But you do see some interesting stuff in there as far as injuries, just because.
Yeah.
I have to be honest. One thing that I'm always surprised that we don't see more often is dislocated shoulders. You see them from time to time, and we saw it with Chandler and Gertz just recently.
Yeah.
But even in the exact way that Gertz dislocated his shoulder, I'm surprised we don't see that very specific injury more often. Like that's the one that I always think is coming and never quite materializes the way I think it will.
What about that freakish one that was at LFA last Friday? The guy's elbow, the arm.
Oh, that was wild. That was what. But that actually, not to that extent, but EJ Brooks, who's actually the whole reason I got into Bellator, is EJ Brooks back at Bellator 53. But we were working a fight of his back before he was signed to any pro organization, and he dislocated his elbow in a fight, and we put it back in between rounds.
Oh wow!
It was kind of one of those things where it was just nobody's looking, and crank, and it's back in. All right, let's move on.
Yeah.
We didn't get caught. We're just gonna move on. That's kind of what if you're in the back like Big John and the refs, they'll always tell you that like if you dislocate a toe and you want me to stop the fight, call attention to it. But if you want me to ignore it, you ignore it. It's kind of what they always tell him. And it was kind of the same thing in between that round with EJ. He just
wow.
Went and we moved on with the third round.
Well, in 199 events coming up this Saturday, Bellator's actually been pretty lucky from not having a pretty catastrophic looking injury. The worst I've seen is I saw a guy suffer a severe compound fracture to his leg at a Tough Enough event in Las Vegas. It was actually amateur, so to add insult, he didn't even get paid, and a guy shot in on his leg, and the bone went the wrong direction, and it was horrific. I mean, the worst injury I've seen. I mean, I was at Tim Sylvia when he got his arm broke against Mir, and some of that stuff. That one wasn't as violent, at least in the crowd. But I was actually front row for that one, and when a guy 15 feet away from you has his leg sticking out of his, I mean, it was nasty. But were you working the? It was in, I believe it was in London, but the Cyborg Santos fight?
Yeah.
Where he took the knee to the head from MVP.
I was in MVP's corner for that one.
Oh, wow.
And so, first of all, I can tell you that whenever he landed that knee, it sounded like a home run. And I was in St. Louis whenever McGuire and Sosa were going at it, and it was home run derby all season. And it distinctly reminded me of a Mark McGuire home run in Busch Stadium. It was so loud. And then when I went over, so I kind of MVP, you stay over here, let them all work. They obviously need room. And I kind of went over to check on the cutman over there, see if everything was okay. And I remember seeing Cyborg's head and thinking that this was a life-changing injury. It turned out not to be, but I remember thinking he has brain damage. There's no way. It was a perfect concave softball size, in his forehead. There was I couldn't see any way that it hadn't affected the underlying tissues. And you know what? He had surgery, had the plates put on, and no worse for wear at all. I mean, what a tough guy. But that was the scariest moment I can remember. was when that happened because I thought I had seen something extremely serious happen right in front of me.
So what's you guys are both going to be at Bellator 199 this weekend, right? Matt, you said you're going, Matt?
Yeah, I
I leave
fly. I
Friday.
fly.
Yep.
Yeah, you
Oh,
get in on
sorry, we're
Friday
both Matt.
too. No, we're both Matt. Yeah, so I fly in Friday morning as well. So I'll be there for the event this weekend, which I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to. I haven't been to a big show in a couple months now.
So you generally you guys get there the same day as weigh-ins, then, right? I'm gonna just call Cutman and Hawk. How's that?
Yep.
There you go.
The Cutman do, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll be there. If it's a now for the international shows, because I do more on the operations side for
hmm
Bellator, I get there a week ahead of time. So for London, that's a Friday show, but I'll be there the Saturday before, so a week ahead of time.
So what
But
do you
normally domestically, it's way in.
when you go international, like go for time difference? Obviously, you have to have your wits about you and stuff, looking out for injuries and cuts and stuff like that. Like I know, like with fighters, we're talking to Fernando last week, or was it whatever it was. I talked to him last week. Um, he said he trains at the time he already puts his mind in training camp at the time he's going to be fighting at. Like, so what do you do to acclimate yourself to the time change and stuff like that? Because I know when I go to Vegas or out, uh, from it takes me a whole week to get used to that time, and by that time I'm usually coming back home, and it messes me up here too.
Um, I don't do too much. I've never had a big problem with jet lag.
hmm
As soon as I get on the plane going internationally, I set my watch to whatever time it is where I'm going, and I start immediately changing my behaviors. So I get on a plane and it would be 2 a.m. wherever I'm going. I go to sleep immediately. I usually take a little melatonin or something if I have to. But I go to sleep immediately, and so that when I land, I'm as close to on as I can get. And then, my wife is a psychologist. That's what she does for a living, and she's always been helpful with me. Like every time something comes out for jet lag, like color therapy or food therapy, anything like that, she's always the first one in line. Like, here, try this. Here, try this. And then I know it sounds cheesy because everybody's talking about it right now, but I do find CBD to be really, really useful, especially specifically for jet lag, because it just relaxes me a little bit and helps me get to sleep when I need to get to sleep without being as groggy as I get with melatonin. Uh, because melatonin is just something it's something you shouldn't take a lot of. Just speaking as a
Yeah.
nurse at this point in time, like it's also one of those drugs that people think taking more is better. It's actually the opposite. Once you get over about 5 milligrams of melatonin, it actually starts working in the opposite direction, keeping you awake. And then if you take it too many days in a row, you start to deplete that in your own body. So, it's just something you wouldn't want to take very often. But with CBD, wherever I can get it, I don't seem to have those problems, and it does help me sleep a little bit better. And I train a lot on the road as well. We're always out there with hoists and a lot of good coaches and stuff like that. And so, like the CBD helps with
You do
that.
jujitsu?
Yeah, I do jujitsu now. It's kind of a late comer to it because I got tired of getting punched in the face.
Yeah.
I wrestled in high school, but I started off my very first martial art was Taekwondo. I have a black belt in Taekwondo,
Oh, cool.
and then from there I moved on to Muay Thai, and I did Golden Gloves all through high school, like the regional championships in St. Louis, stuff like that. And then uh, did judo, and that hurts a lot. I don't know if you guys do judo, but judo hurts a lot. You get
Oh
people
yeah.
just laying on your ass so often. And I was like, I want to do judo, but not fall. So now I'm in jiu-jitsu.
That's a good answer. Yeah.
Here we are.
That's the
I
best
want
way
to do
to.
jiu-jitsu without slamming myself into the ground first. And we'll just start from our
Yeah.
knees, and I'm old, and we'll go from there. So,
Oh yeah, trust me. I know all this stuff hurts the older you get, no matter what you do. So,
yeah, but
but yeah, I did a judo seminar once, and I knew that I was already too old for it when I did it. I
it's
mean, I do
tough.
jujitsu. Yeah, it is. It's a hard. I mean, you're just getting comfortable getting slammed all the time. So,
But I do recommend,
yeah,
my sister's son is 11, and she asked me what martial art I thought he should do first, and I told her judo. I was like, because he's at the age where he can take it,
yeah,
and it will get him used to not being afraid to get hit or move forward in situations.
yeah.
I was like, it's a good first one because it gets a lot of the more painful crap out of the way. So, but yeah, jiu-jitsu. Yeah, I'm down here with Extreme Gracie with Nick Recanati and Herberto Abreu here in Florida. So it's a good school, and it's a little bit different from where I came from. The school I came from in St. Louis, which was a Hicks and Gracie school. So I like seeing the variance in the styles and how jiu-jitsu is growing now too.
Oh, you're in Florida. I thought you were on the West Coast.
No, no, no. I'm in Leesburg, Florida, just north of Orlando.
Oh wow, look at that. I was just who do we have that from? Ray is from Florida too. Rhino, he's the Rhino in the MMA community.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, you guys should roll
I've
together.
actually I've talked to a few of the people from the MMA community via DM because there's a couple that just live like a few towns over, and we've talked and just like, oh hey shit, yeah, they were also here close together. Because I'll tell you, it was a big like it puckered me up a little bit to like be myself on that message board and not
Oh yeah.
lurk or hide behind a screen name, because I'm on the other boards. I read all the stuff,
Oh,
but
yeah.
the MMA community is the only one where I come out and say this is who I am and I'm 100% shilling for Bellator at this point in time.
Yeah, no,
So,
I love it there. I mean, it's the only forum I go on. I used to go on the Sherdog forums back in the day, but it like what we were just talking about a little while ago, the 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 way people think it's so cool to be mean and just negative about stuff, it's a little off-putting. So that's why the MMA community doesn't do that. That's why I like it.
no, I've always felt very welcome there. Um, I need to post more often because every once in a while I think we get like new members on the board, and then I'll post something and they'll be like, "Who's this guy? Why is he speaking like he knows what's going on?" So, uh, but what you reminded me of, it was something I read that Matt Riddle had said today. I think I read it on Twitter just before we came on, and somebody had asked him the difference between pro wrestling and MMA. And he said, with pro wrestling, he's like, the people are invested in it and they have that character that they like and they want to see them do whatever it is that their character would do, whether that's win or lose, whether they're heel or babyface. He's like, with MMA, he's like, it's really still just that Just Bleed crowd. He's like, I could be at my own hometown with my own fans in the crowd, and if I get knocked out, the crowd is still going to cheer and roar and be happy and excited that that happened. He's like, whereas with pro wrestling, he said, I don't feel that. I feel like so much more supported by the fans as myself, and less is like just wanting to see me get hurt. And, I actually took that to heart. That was kind of a deep observation to me.
Yeah.
That he put that together, and he was right. The MMA fan base can still be to this day and age just bleed. Those old days.
Yeah, just please.
And I mean,
Yeah.
hey, come on. Sometimes I get that way too. So,
Yeah.
like, I'm not gonna absolve myself of any responsibility here. I'm definitely that way. But even down here where I started training, I specifically went to a school that was just JJ and doesn't really do MMA, and I did it for that reason.
Yeah.
Because it's actually just a bit of a nicer community to hang out with in an MMA gym sometimes.
Yeah.
That seemed to happen when MMA became really mainstream, though, because when I started watching and attending events in the late '90s, and it wasn't like that. When you'd go to the events, I tell people that there was a time when someone would boo in the crowd, that the crowd would basically turn on that fan, and it was a smaller shows, and even some of the earlier UFC events, that I attended, it wasn't. It wasn't like that. You basically cheered and applauded the fighter, even if somebody went in there and got knocked out in 15 seconds. When that guy walked out of the ring, usually everybody kind of gave him a hand and patted him on the back.
Japanese style.
It kind of was like that.
More of appreciation.
It was different. And I don't know when the switch actually happened, and I think it's just when it became
Ultimate Fighter. No,
probably
it was when they started getting drunk on the Ultimate Fighter.
Yeah, when pissing on somebody's bed made you famous.
Yep. Yeah, and that's when it happened, and that was also the failure, though, vice versa, of Fight Master. Not that anybody remembers that show.
I remember.
I went to the final in L.A. In Long Beach.
But I remember, we would have all these meetings because that was hell. That was Dean Lasser and I, and that was absolute hell for us because that was when Bellator was in the 12-week-in-a-row seasons,
Mm-hmm.
and Fight Master I think was 8 weeks. And so for 2 months straight, Dean Lassner and I were going from Fight Master filming to do all the fights and everything there because we were also working operations for Bellator, so we were keeping an eye on things. We were going straight from a show to New Orleans for Fight Master for the week, back to the show, wherever that was, back and forth to like places all over the country in New Orleans for 8 weeks without seeing our families, without going home. Uh, and it was going to be worth it because we were going to show all the people how serious MMA can be, and it was going to like in our minds, and it's just so stupid in hindsight. Like I feel like South Park with like Captain Hindsight, like duh. Training is boring as shit. Training is boring. Like to watch training, like maybe if it's your little 3-year-old out there doing cute little judo throws, like training's okay. But to actually, it's not a Rocky montage, and that's what we convinced ourselves. We convinced ourselves that we were going to put out 10 weeks of Rocky montages, and we put out 10 weeks of boring ass realistic training. And unfortunately, that does not move the needle because after the first one, you've literally seen it all. Like, yep, they're drilling arm bars again. They sure are. That's like because that's what it actually looks like.
Yeah.
But in our minds, we just had this like really built up what it was going to look like, be like, and people were going to see just like what athletes they are, and and I think people did, and then realized, wow, being an athlete like is boring. Like if there's any reason we should appreciate athletes, it's their discipline and being able to do something so monotonous, and day in and day out. Eating the same food and doing the same training schedule and not going out partying and doing all those things. All the things that Instagram tells you are great about working out. They really do that, and unfortunately showed that in a way that did not sell. Even though it was honestly the best moment on that show, did not make it onto that show.
Mm.
If you remember the semifinals between Evan Cutts and Joe Riggs, Joe Riggs beat the ever-loving heck out of Evan Cutts. But Evan Cutts wouldn't quit. If there was an actual Rocky moment on that show, it was Evan Cutts like basically refusing to quit against Joe Riggs, no matter just how brutal it got. So immediately after the show, we sent out Evan Cutts to the hospital. He had multiple orbit fractures, broken nose, everything. And the ER doctor there in New Orleans kind of jumped the gun, as a lot of uneducated doctors do. Especially when you get some of the older doctors that still think MMA is like the John McCain cockfighting sort of thing. Basically told Evan Cutts he was never going to fight again. Straight up told him, "You never fight again, never, never."
Oh wow.
And that was really just more his opinion. Evan Cutts has fought again since then.
Yeah.
But doctors aren't above letting personal bias color their diagnoses. And anyway, so Evan Cutts comes back to the house, and there was this kitchen where we all kind of hung out that wasn't on camera, but there was a guy with a camera in there, so I know it got caught. Evan Cutts walks through the door, and he just like stops, and Joe Riggs is in the room, as are several of us, and he just breaks down in tears, and he said, "They told me I'll never fight again," and he just breaks down in tears in the doorway. And of course, Joe Riggs, feeling responsible, because Joe Riggs is really just a nice guy, gets up and gives him a hug and starts apologizing profusely for what he believes is ending Evan Cutts' career.
Oh
now we
wow.
have this like completely real moment of Evan Cutts believing he's never going to fight again, and the guy that did it to him apologizing, and they're hugging. Which to me shows that was martial arts. That was MMA. That's what
Yeah.
to see that we could do these things to each other, but it wasn't personal. It wasn't an emotional thing when we fight. That it was it was just business. Never made it. Never made it. Not even a peep of that.
Wow.
On the show. And you're like, how could you have possibly left that out? It was the greatest moment of filming, and it left on the cutting room floor. It's awful.
Yeah, well, who knows how many more viewers that might have attracted to the final, because he fought, I think he fought Mike Bronzoulis at Bellator 106, and Joe Riggs ended up winning that, and who knows, that a scene like that gets viral these days, and you never know how many more views or fans you might get to that.
They were
You
just so
talk,
adamant that they weren't going to show them as anything other than like machines almost. It's very weird. It was the same guy that did The Amazing Race. Was the guy that directed and produced it. So we had, I will say,
is that Mark Burnett or Mike Burnett or something like that?
No,
Yeah.
a Dutch name. I can't remember. My wife would kill me. She's Dutch, but it was He was a Dutch producer that had done The Amazing Race, and he was a great guy, but he just had this vision that didn't jive with what audiences in this demographic wanted to see.
Hmm.
There's probably a middle ground between the Ultimate Fighter and what we did, and we've just
Yeah.
we just missed the mark. So it happens. I'd love to see it again because that was some of the best. I mean, if you'll indulge another story, we were there was the stage where all four coaches sat and like judged the fighters as they were sitting there.
Yeah.
Well, we were in this really nasty part of New Orleans where filming was very, very cheap. And we were in this warehouse, and within this warehouse, we had built that stage, the cage, all of their dorms, and all of their game rooms. Like, these guys literally did not leave this one location that entire time. So it wasn't even like the Ultimate Fighter where they could go back and forth to the gym. Well, anyway, we're filming, and we hear this train just like wailing on its whistle, just wailing and will not stop. And it's getting closer and closer and closer until it's literally right outside the warehouse, which isn't exactly insulated, and just holding on the horn. At that point in time, Frank Shamrock, eyes as big as saucer plates, jumps up out of his chair and runs outside. He had parked his car across the tracks in this parking lot of this warehouse. So the whole time we're hearing this train blaring on the whistle, it's because they were about to hit Frank Shamrock's car with the train.
Wow.
So he's out there trying to move his car. And when he comes back in and he sits down and we all get reset, and it was the assistant director, I can't recall his name, goes, if anybody else has anything that they need to do during filming, would you please let a PA know and not do it yourself? Meaning, he wasn't mad that Frank had parked on the tracks and interrupted filming. He was mad that Frank didn't toss his keys to a PA so they could keep filming.
Oh, wow.
I was like, man, TV's crazy. That's
Yeah.
all I was thinking the whole time I was there.
Well, we got looks like about 10 more minutes here in the show, and I want to get your take. I'll let the fans know this Saturday night's Bellator 199 live on the Paramount Network. The main event is Ryan Bader Muhammad versus King Mo Lawal, and we've talked about that fight several times over the last couple of weeks as the tournament's kind of unfolded. The other fight that really has my attention is Paul Daly and John Fitch. John Fitch makes his debut in Bellator after coming from a World Series of Fighting, and obviously had his long run in the UFC prior to that. Any fights that jump out as you? I know you don't want to have any kind of conflict of interest as far as picking anything, but anything that excites you? I know Aaron Pico is always on the card.
Yeah, Aaron Pico.
Yeah, Aaron Pico is just crazy to me with how much he improves every time, and just how humble he is as well. I've never seen anybody just soak everything up. Every time I meet him, it's just more of like, what can I learn from you? Like, I'm shaking your hand. What can I learn from you? But I'm actually really interested in our main event. I know it sounds cheesy, but Bader is just such an oversized, and I never knew this. I never knew this till I met him. Such an oversized 205er. He's big. He is so big compared to a lot of the other 205ers that I've dealt with. And I'm like, man. And so, and Mo is kind of an undersized 205er, to be honest. Here we are fighting at heavyweight. That fight, I don't know what's going to happen. Like, I can't call that. That's, every once in a while, the most interesting fight is the one where I can't predict an outcome. And I think for that one, it's me, because in my mind, I'm thinking Bader's size. You know what I mean? But I'm also wondering how Bader fighting at heavyweight, which he's not normally used to, will that make him feel sluggish? Will that make him feel slow? Has his diet not been as clean to be up where he needs to be? Whereas we have Mo, who we know has had injuries in the past and has kept him out for a little bit with his hip and his knee. And what's he going to weigh in? I guess I'm really curious what each of them is going to weigh in at.
That's actually been a pretty big topic on the MMA community. It got brought up in one of the threads. And I think King Mo, I keep saying Muhammad Lawal, but King Mo, as most people know him. Yeah, I know, but most people know him as King Mo. I think I feel like when he fought in Sengoku and when he had his heavyweight fights earlier, it seemed like he was between like 210 and 220, somewhere in that range. I think whereas his catch weights with Rampage, I think we're at 215, if I remember right. What do you think
And
Bader
that's
will
what I
weigh in
expect.
at?
I would. Well, shoot.
I mean, when you say he's big, I've met him before, but I never really. I mean, I've met Tito too, and Tito looks like he's like 250
I would
pounds
guess
to
that.
me.
I would guess that Bader weighs in at least 230.
Okay.
Just from the size of him. You know what I mean? Like he's going to weigh in at least 230. Whereas I would guess that Mo's going to weigh in around 220. So
220.
we're talking at least a 10-pound size difference. But man, I don't, like I said, I don't want to make a prediction, and I like it's hard for me now too because I've already done the assignment, so I know where I'm going to be. So
Uh-huh.
it's also, I'm like in the back of my mind, I was like, don't say something, and then uh, that actually came up recently. Somebody said, "Oh, the line on this fight is really, really good," and I said, "Okay." And they're like, "You want to put in on that?" I was like, "Absolutely not. I'm working that fight." I was like, "You want me to Pete Rose this shit? Come on, like I can't do that." You
I
know,
haven't I
like
haven't seen the line. Is Bader a favorite?
Bader is the favorite right now. Not by much. It's pretty even. I think Bader's at like minus 190 and Mo's at like plus 220 or something like that. So it's
Okay.
pretty close. It's not a complete blowout. Uh, Getting back to what you mentioned earlier, I was just thinking about it a little bit more with Aaron Pico. He needs to. He's fighting a lot of guys with a lot of experience, and I know that's important to Pico, and that is a big part of his decision making process. If he'll take a fight, is the experience of the person he's fighting.
Yeah.
But I would like to see Bellator give him people that aren't just experienced, but are how would I put it, like positively experienced, which means that they often come out on the. I mean, like I want. There's a big difference between a guy, I guess, who's like 12-8, and has been fighting for a long time and is just sort of a regional gatekeeper, and a guy that's like 4-5-0, like maybe like Logan Storley or something like that.
Uh-huh.
There's a big
Yeah.
difference, even though one has a lot more fights. There's still a big difference in the skill level. So I would like to see Aaron Pico get into more of the less fights, but maybe the more highly skilled fighters in some areas. He fought Zach Freeman, and like full disclosure, Zach Freeman's one of my guys. He's been a training partner of mine for a long time, and I cornered him in that fight because that's my boy. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
despite what I said earlier about conflict of interest, I did that, and I was there for that fight. But I didn't need to do anything because it didn't last very long. But that's, I think, a bit of a difference is that Zach Freeman was known for that kind of fight. You know what I mean? And so now we've got Pico in a situation where he's taking experienced guys, but not necessarily skilled guys. So what I would like to see him is get in there with somebody. Uh, he bounces between 45 and 55. I feel like with what's he said now that he wants to kind of make his home at 55. Pico. Um, I would like to see him against somebody like Sadawad.
There you go.
Somebody that's
Oh yeah.
experienced but very skilled. You know what I mean? Like he's dangerous. Like
Yeah.
I saw
Sadawad's
that.
game.
Yeah, right. And Watt just took out Freeman, and he's
Yeah.
about to fight. Was it? He's about to fight Rickles in London, or not Rickles? Sorry,
No,
Couture.
he's
Couture
fighting
in
Couture and
Pachanga.
yes, down the street from
In
me.
Pachanga. Yeah, yeah. So, and I mean, and that's a dangerous fight for Ryan Couture. That's a very dangerous fight for Ryan Couture. He's been a little bit more inactive lately. Fighting. What's it been like once every 6 months tops?
Mm.
He's coming off a win, but what was it, 2 losses in a row before that? To come in against somebody like Awad, that's a big deal, and that's who I feel like Pico should be fighting right now. Like I prefer an Awad Pico matchup over an Awad Couture matchup right now.
Yeah, I mean, even the guy that Awad just beat, I think he beat JJ Ambrose, and even
Yeah.
that would be a not a bad fight for Pico. I've been lucky. I just by luck I've had the chance to be at every one of Pico's fights in his career so far. So just by total fluke, and obviously this week will be the fourth time. So I'm definitely cheering for him just for the story, honestly, of being able to say
Oh yeah.
saw one of the all time
I want him
greats
to
from the
do
start.
well. There are fighters. There are fighters like even popular fighters on the Bellator roster right now that are working hard to foster the type of like support, I guess, that I feel like Pico gets naturally. You know what I mean? Like if you meet Aaron Pico or you know anything about Aaron
Yeah.
Pico, you just want him to do well. Like he's everyone's little brother. You know, he's
Yeah.
like he's everyone's just like, gosh, you want him to do so well.
Yeah.
And where other fighters have to like work and cultivate and try to come off that way, just is. He doesn't have to try because he is.
Yeah, I think it's
And
because of his youth, you know, because he's such a young man, he's very mature how he
oh yeah,
handles everything.
yep. And even if he didn't know your name, you could walk up to him and say, "We met 4 years ago at a Shoney's," and he would be like, "Oh yeah, absolutely, man." And like he would never make you feel like he didn't remember who you were, even though he's like it's like Captain America. Like apparently he's a little Captain America right
Yeah,
now.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
he's like all the good things. Like
That's
that's
funny.
just what he reminds me of. So you just want him to do well, and I'm happy for that. You know, he's got good camps around him, good management around him, and he's adjusting and changing positive ways. So like he is a future superstar of the sport, no doubt.
One of the other main card fights is Czech Congo versus Javi Ayala. Ed actually interviewed Javi last Friday.
Yeah.
Um, that's a alternate fight for the tournament, as far as I understand it. I also heard Scott mention that I believe if Krokop were to beat Roy Nelson, he would become an alternate in the tournament, and I think he even mentioned the number one alternate. Do you know anything about that, or can you clear that up at all, or have you?
I mean, I honestly don't know. I mean, I knew about Ayala and Congo being an alternate. I hadn't heard that about Crow Cop and Nelson. I mean, I know though that Crow Cop got drug tested recently uh, by the commission. So where's that? Let's see. That's in London, right? So
That's
that's being
London.
run by the Mohegan Sun Commission. So I know that he's been getting like regularly drug tested and everything. So if it were to happen that way, it'll be on the up and up, and they should be able to run right into it.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully they don't have to use any alternates. Hopefully the
Yeah,
tournament.
that would be the best. I mean, because right now I love the way the tournament is shaking up. You know, Chael Fedor on one side. Come on, that's awesome.
Yeah, no,
So
I mean that's a
like,
hardcore fan. That's a
yeah,
great fight. And from the start of the tournament, I picked Fedor versus Mitrione rematch. I thought they had another collision course coming after obviously Mitrione finished him, but it was not you know it was one of those situations where Fedor's punch another quarter inch to one direction, and we might have been
right.
watching him get his hand raised that night. So
And
um,
you know, it was funny backstage at the last show in Chicago. It was funny to see Mitrione and Fedor, and Matt Mitrione was like, "This is Fedor. He's the greatest of all time." He's like telling his children, the guy, that he this is the greatest of all time, though. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
I beat him, but he's better. You know, like it was amazing. And then Mitrione made his kids carry all the water out to the car. Like those kids are not getting off easy on fights.
That's funny.
They were howling everything. So
So while we still got a couple minutes, I want to jump over to the other side to the UFC card and kind of get your opinion on some of the fights this weekend. This Saturday night also is a UFC 224 pay per view from Brazil. The main event is Raquel Pennington challenging Amanda Nunes for her bantamweight title. Do you think Raquel has any chance in that fight, or you see Nunes pretty much running that for a while?
I wish Pennington had a chance in that fight, but I just don't see Amanda going anywhere for a while. She's dominant right now. I wish we had her or had something to do with her. You know what I mean? Like I think everybody wants to be in the Amanda Nunes business. She's just dope right now.
Yeah, no,
It's exciting to watch her fight.
I think
Yeah,
most
I
people
think
are.
that. What is the line on that? Do they have the lines out for that? It's got to be
I don't
crazy
have it in
popular.
front of me, but I imagine she's got to be at least a plus 250 or a minus
Yeah,
250. I would think.
yeah, yeah.
You know,
Because
um,
yeah, I wouldn't. The only thing that might encourage me to put money on Pennington right now is that woman that just won like $1 million at the Kentucky Derby on that pick five. Like, knowing that there's that kind of luck out there, maybe I would put some money on Pennington, but not if I was using any kind of logic right now.
well, she's coming off an injury. She suffered a broken leg in a motorcycle accident. Her last fight was at UFC 205, where she beat Misha Tate. But I think that was kind of a Misha Tate that had kind of moved on and realized that
Yes.
she was looking forward to retirement that night. Um, what do you think, Ed?
Can
Are
I
you,
say
you
that I like Misha Tate more in retirement? Is that weird? But like, I actually like her more now, and like the things she's saying now, and the things she's doing now
I
than I
just
did
like
when she
her.
was fighting.
I like her all the time. So
I mean, I'm not going to disagree there either.
What are you on the aboard with Nunes as well there, Ed?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Like I said, I haven't. I checked out that card. I mean, like, obviously Mackenzie Dern's fighting there and stuff, but like, I've kind of been more focused on. I'm gonna watch them both. I'll be watching more focused on Bellator 199 just because I'm more interested in having interviewed Javi and us talking about it now and just watching the Fedor win from last weekend whenever it was. I'm It's hard for me to keep going back and forth, so I'll watch them both. But I do have Nunes winning there. She's I mean it's in Brazil. I don't know. She's pretty dominant right now. I feel like she's at the top of her game. I don't see her. I don't see her losing to Pennington on Saturday.
Another fight that's on the card is for the hardcore fans, and is for the people that kind of mock Bellator for having old legends fighting. We get Vitor Belfort versus Lyoto Machida. I bring that up when people are. I'm a huge fan of both those guys. I since UFC 12, I've been on the Vitor bandwagon from, him knocking out John Hess in a small super brawl event or whatever the heck it was there in Hawaii. Back in the day when he was Victor Gracie. But that's one of those fights too that if it was happening in Bellator, we'd hear fans, some of the fans complaining and saying it shouldn't be happening, and this happening on the UFC pay-per-view. But I'll be pulling for Vitor. Like I said, I'm a fan of both, but I think Lyoto is just a little too technical, and I think he'll be able to weather the storm and probably at least grind out a decision in that one.
Yeah, you think a decision? Like, I don't know. I feel like I think somebody's going out in that fight.
I agree.
I don't know. I just have a feeling.
Yeah, maybe if Machida comes out aggressive, I think there's a chance. I think I can't recall if Vitor's last fight was against Marquardt or not, but it was a decision. So I mean, I don't know. He kind of played a little bit smarter version. I don't know if it's because he's on the last fight of his contract, or maybe he's kind of going out on a win maybe is more important at this point, so he can has some negotiating power if he wants to try to fight in Bellator, or if he decides that he wants to have another fight or two in the UFC. Obviously, even a decision win carries a lot more weight going into the negotiations.
Yeah, I don't. And that's the bane of the system as it is now. Like kind of like what we were talking about before, fighting for someone who's a money guy versus someone who's a fan. If you go out in an exciting fight and still lose, I think Scott's going to re-sign you versus if you go out on a boring win. I mean, look at some of the people we've cut.
Yeah.
If you go out on some decision wins, you might test free agency.
Yeah.
An exciting loss. The important thing with any Vitor fight is, what is Tommy Tohold going to do? With it on his show. Because there's nothing better to me than when Tommy does his Vitor. So, like, every time he fights, I'm like, no, we have to make sure we check out Tommy Tohold this week. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you see that going, Ed? Who's your pick for that night?
I mean, I feel like, like I said, I agree with Cutman that the finish is coming, and I'm leaning towards Lyoto only because, as a karate person, I feel like his striking is probably a little more refined, and he's probably got more accuracy versus Vitor's. Everybody knows Vitor. He'll either do those machine gun punches and the spinning head kick that Tommy Tohold likes to mention all the time, or or you know what I mean. Like it's more predictable, whereas Lyoto's not as predictable. So, if the finish comes by TKO or KO, I'm leaning for it coming from in favor of Lyoto Machida.
And then, probably the biggest fight of the night, the fight that has the most meaning other than the title fight, is Kevin Gastelum versus Jacare Souza. Essentially a number one contender fight, in theory, for the middleweight division. What's your take on that one, Matt? You think Jacare's going to keep rolling, or you think the younger kid's going to make a name for himself?
I think this is Gastelum's moment. I think Jacare is right at the end of anything that he could possibly do. This is his last shot. But I think that he's going to go out on a shield, and Gastelum comes away with this one.
My heart wants to go with Jacare just for the old school in me, but I'm kind of leaning that same way too.
Exactly, and that's what your thought. You want Jacare by sub. Like that's what I'm like. That's what I
Yeah.
want. But
Yeah.
I just don't think that's in the cards on this fight. No, and I was honestly surprised that Jacare. He's doing well, but there was a lot of talk of him coming over to Bellator on his last contract was up, and I was surprised he didn't do that. To be
Mm.
honest, just because of where he was at in his career, I thought it would have been the best thing for him at that moment. But it's worked out for him here. And, here he is fighting Gastelum, but I just think that it's going to be too little, too late for him, and Gastelum's going to come with it.
Well, if he gets a win here, then it looks like a great decision to stay because then
Yeah,
he fights probably the winner of Whitaker and Romero. And if he loses, then who knows what the UFC does. I don't know how many fights he
that's
actually
the if,
signed.
unfortunately. So,
Yeah, exactly.
but I just I agree with you 100%. I really want Jacare to win. It's an old school fan. It's a name I've been rooting for a long time. But it just doesn't feel right to me. It just feels like a bad fight at a bad time. Every once in a while a fighter takes a fight, you just look at it and go, why? Why did you do that? Like, no, this is not that time.
Yeah.
And
I'm curious to see how he looks in the cage next to Jacare because when he fought Chris Weidman, I know Weidman's a large 85er.
yeah,
He looked like he was on it, and he turned out to be too small for Chris that night. But I'm curious to see how he looks.
Jacare is tall. Like, Jacare is tall, but he's also not one that I worry too much about using his reach. As far as that goes. But I don't think that he's outsizing or out muscling Gastelum very much.
No, I think we're pretty much all aboard there. You there too, Ed? You seen Gastelum or?
Yeah. Well, not. I think it depends on what happens. It's that's. Jacare kind of hinted at one of the countdown show episodes. I forget which one. He was kind of like almost admitting to passing the torch to the younger guys. So I kind of agree with, like, maybe he's thinking about, he's had surgeries and stuff, so maybe he's thinking about calling it a day too. But it's still, he's still a competitor. He's obviously going to compete, and the thing is, I feel I think Gaslam has the power and the output to hurt him and put him away, or with a TKO or something. But if they get in a clinch or somebody gets grabby, it's favors Jacare, obviously, because of his
Yeah,
experience.
100%.
So yeah, so it's hard for me to pick.
Yeah, it's a game plan. It's a game plan. Who has the better game plan coming in?
Yeah.
I think is going to be a big part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like we could talk for hours about the fights. I really enjoyed this conversation, and
Yeah. Me too.
I really want to appreciate you coming on here, especially the week of an event and coming off the epicness of working Fedor's corner. It
And I
doesn't get
appreciate
much.
you having me on. I like to do stuff like this, and I like to. I know my wife loves it too because I'll go talk to somebody else about this stuff for a while, leave her alone. So.
Do you have
funny.
any sponsors that you want to plug or anything? I know they're a big part of your corner work.
That's another positive of working for Bellator. Affliction has been sponsoring me for years now, and so I'm always appreciative of them. Turf House and the Mod Cabin, which sponsors this beautiful beard that you see here. People always go, "You should get a sponsor for your beard," and I always go, "Actually, I do. It's the Mod Cabin, modcabin.com. Check it out. Lots of good stuff." And then War Tape that I wrap hands with. It's like literally, it's kind of a sign with Cutman if you're using like the normal, just like kind of white tape that you get off of just like TitleMMA.com or whatever, Title Boxing. Like, oh, okay, so you don't wrap enough for your fingers to bleed, because that's the big difference between like War Tape and regular tape, is that when I've wrapped my 40th person that night, my fingers aren't bleeding from War Tape.
Oh wow.
So yeah, it's a huge difference. So yeah, Affliction, Chirp House, Mod Cabin, and War Tape all take very good care of me, and honestly, I couldn't do what I do without them doing what they do for me. So always very appreciative.
Awesome. And people can follow you on Twitter at CutmanMatt. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep. I'm on all of it. I've made it pretty standard across social media. Everything is at CutmanMatt, but Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. Heck, I think I might even have a Periscope that I never look at. The chat
Well,
code.
it's connected to your Twitter, so.
Yeah, right. So I've been playing around with making my Instagram a corporate account because Mercedes Terrell, our ring girl, said that she got in trouble for posting sponsor stuff but not saying it was a sponsored post. But then I realized that was a problem that somebody that has hundreds of thousands of followers has versus somebody like me that has like twos of thousands of followers. So it doesn't really play out for me the way it does for her.
Yeah.
Well, and as usual, everybody can follow us at Combat Hour on Twitter, myself at MMA Hawk 21 on Twitter and Instagram, and Ed at Carbazol on Twitter. Great show, Matt. Thank you for joining us, and I look forward to running into you at the weigh-ins this Friday night.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. And thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Appreciate you coming on.
Peace, y'all.